Fei Lu Novel Network A.Level Contracted Novel. Pirate King Dragon Clan System, you will repay the warmth with pain. You will repay your arrogance with your eyes. You will repay the betrayal with blood. On the day I return to the world, all rebellious subjects shall die. The Dragon Clan Fei Lu Novel Network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. Chapter 1. Dragon Clan System, for Collection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Where is this? Feeling a bit bright in front of him, Chu Han opened his eyes and saw the sea blue sky, white yet peaceful white clouds, and occasional seagull calls, which made Chu Han feel strange. Little one, you're awake. On the deck, the middle-aged man saw that he had saved the little one and woke up. He was taken aback and said gently. Upon hearing the sound, Chu Han instinctively bounced his upper body and turned his head to look at the man. The man has a slightly muscular figure, wearing a pair of glasses, a face full of stubble, a white coat, and an orange T-shirt, cropped pants, and grass shoes. He looks a bit fluid, but his body exudes an astonishing aura that is not to be underestimated. This made Chu Han feel a bit familiar with the man. I really wish I had met him somewhere. By the way, isn't he the underworld king Raleigh in the One Piece world? How did he appear here? No. It should be why I came to the One Piece world. I remember I was originally competing for that treasure at Nibelungen route, but then it seemed like an explosion occurred and I came here. Is the One Piece world connected to Nibelungen route? Chu Han struggled to recall, suddenly feeling a slight difference in his body. He averted his gaze from the man and looked at his tiny body. He began to wonder, but why did my body become smaller after I left Nibelungen and Jen came to this world, like a child of 7 or 8 years old? Looking at the contemplative child, the middle-aged man smiled and said, "This little one has a very dense mind." "What's your name, little one?" the man asked. When asking someone else's name again, don't you introduce yourself first? Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly and he said very cautiously. Watching the little guy staring at him, the middle-aged man couldn't help but smile. This little guy is still very vigilant. My name is Raleigh, and I am the vice captain of a pirate group. By the way, I forgot to say that you are now on our ship. The middle-aged man reported his family's door. Pirates. Raleigh. Chu Han pretended to be puzzled and said. Upon hearing this, Raleigh's eyes narrowed and he smiled proudly. Why, have you also heard of my name? Never heard of it. Chu Han shook his head slowly and said coldly, causing the latter's laughter to come to an abrupt end with a constipated expression and a helpless smile. You're really an interesting child. Now you should say your name, right? Chu Han. Chu Han stood up with a serious expression and bowed slightly, saying, "Thank you for saving me, uncle." Uncle. Am I this old? Raleigh rubbed his stubble all over his face and let out a bitter smile. Just as he was about to speak, the ship door in the distance from the deck was suddenly opened, and the group hurriedly walked out. Chu Han turned his head and found that the leader among the visitors was a tall middle-aged man wearing a domineering captain's uniform, wearing a captain's hat, with a handsome appearance and a long curved beard on his mouth. Behind him was a red-haired boy wearing a straw hat and a small man wearing a clown's uniform. Joel D. Roger and red-headed Shanks. So the one behind should be the clown Bucky. Interesting, interesting. Seeing this, Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly, and based on his past life memories, he suddenly guessed in his heart, with a hint of a bitter smile on the corner of his mouth. It seems that I traveled a bit early. Now that Gail D. Roger is still alive, it means that there are at least 20 years left until the original plot officially starts. I'm afraid I'll become an uncle when the Straw Hat Kid goes out to sea, right? But that's what's interesting, isn't it? Chu Han's eyes burst out with a burst of semen, and his blood boiled faintly, with a hint of evil laughter at the corner of his mouth. In the 20 years following Roger's accession to the Pirate King, it can be said that it was a very chaotic period, with the replacement of old and new eras, the beginning of the Age of Discovery, the struggle between the four emperors, the establishment of the seven armed seas, the rise of the Revolutionary Army, the rise of the three great admirals of the Navy, and countless pirate regimes vying for the new world. This is simply a chaotic world. In times of chaos, all heroes are vying for power. This is an era where strong people emerge, and it is also an era that Chu Han yearns for. As the first strong person in his previous life, Chu Han is definitely not the kind of person who can live his life with peace of mind and mediocrity. Power and power are his ultimate goals. Ding! The Dragon Clan system is officially activated, and scanning begins. Host. Chu Han genealogy. Human age. 8 years old. Physical fitness. 7 strength. 6 speed. 7 combat power. 5. At this moment, Chu Han, whose heart was boiling with excitement, suddenly heard a cold mechanical sound in his mind, which made him slightly stunned. The Dragon Clan system. Is this the legendary Golden Finger? No. This should be related to the Nibelungen thing from a previous life. Chu Han's eyes flashed with a hint of essence, recalling his own journey without reason. He suddenly had some guesses in his heart. He was about to try to communicate with the system for a few words to verify his guess, but the cold metallic sound rang out again. Host experience task activation. Main task. Kill all the Tianlong people, overthrow the world government, ascend to the world's first throne, and rule the world. Task reward. Bronze and Fire King bloodline punishment for failure. Forced erasure. Branch Task 1. Ding. Join Roger Pirates within 3 days. Task reward, B.level Dragon Clan bloodline, and randomly trigger a type of speaking spirit. Failure penalty. None. Side Task 2. Not yet activated. Host needs to activate it on its own. Upon hearing this, Chu Han was slightly stunned, but his face did not change much, but his heart was already filled with turmoil. Speak eloquently. The Dragon Clan. Perhaps it was something from the novel, Dragon Clan, that he had read in his previous life. It seems that his guess is indeed correct. Everything is up to Nibelung. That thing is playing tricks. At the same time, just as Chu Han was lost in thought, distant figures such as Gerd Roger and Shanks slowly approached him. Chapter 2. Roger Pirates, Seeking Flowers, Seeking Harvest. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hello. In a moment of trance, Gold Roger and Shanks in the distance slowly walked up to Chu Han. Shanks, who was still a teenager, looked at Chu Han in contemplation and spoke up first. My name is Shanks, what's your name? Chu Han was slightly taken aback and instantly regained consciousness from his lost state. He looked at the smiling red-haired boy in front of him, his eyes narrowed slightly, and he said lightly, Chu Han. Chu Han. What a strange name, Shanks murmured. Shanks, it's impolite to comment on someone else's name casually. At this moment, Gerd Roger reached out to touch Shanks' red hair, smiled heartily, and then turned his head to look at Chu Han, whose face was calm, and smiled, saying, Don't worry, Shanks is like this, he doesn't have much meaning. Its voice is strong and powerful, and the smiling eyes are incredibly deep, as if there is a lion hidden inside. The whole person exudes an astonishing momentum, with an incredibly domineering and easy-going demeanor. Upon hearing this, Chu Han smiled faintly, shook his head, and then looked up at Gerd Roger, who was smiling at him. A glimmer of light flashed in his eyes, and he said, Uncle, are you? By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet. Roger paused for a moment and smiled. My name is Gerd Roger, and I am also the captain of this pirate ship. If you don't mind, you can also call me Uncle Roger. Are you called Chu Han? How could you be alone in such a place when you're so young? Roger asked in confusion. Yes, yes, when we found you, you were still drifting on the sea. Fortunately, I discovered you early, otherwise you would have been eaten by the Sea Kings. Bucky excitedly said, with a proud expression on his face, as if saying, "Come and thank me." Seeing this, Chu Han ignored Ba Ji and shook his head, pretending to be disheartened. He spread out his hand and said calmly, "I don't know what's going on. When I woke up, I was here. I only remember my name, and I can't remember anything else." "Is it because you have amnesia?" Shanks exclaimed in surprise. "Probably," Chu Han nodded and said lightly. After speaking, everyone's faces couldn't help but show a sympathetic expression. In their minds, Chu Han and his family must have encountered a shipwreck, where their loved ones died or collided with something that caused amnesia. This can also explain why Chu Han drifted alone at sea. It is not uncommon to encounter dangerous seas with constantly changing weather and pirate infestations, and no one has known how many ships have sunk in a calm sea since ancient times. "Alright, what are you two doing here? If you don't go to work soon, it's time to set sail," said the underworld king Raleigh after a moment. He turned his head and scolded Shanks and Bucky standing beside him, and only after they left, did he turn his head and look at Chu Han, whose face was plain, with a smile. "Where do you want to go next? If you don't mind, we can give you a ride." After speaking, the underworld king Raleigh and Roger exchanged a glance, and both made a decision to send this poor little guy to the next town, giving him a safe and stable life without having to face the risks of the sea again. "I have nowhere to go," Chu Han shook his head and then looked firmly at Roger and Raleigh, saying, "I want to follow you. Are you going to be a pirate?" The two of them were taken aback. Chu Han nodded and said lightly. Upon hearing this, the two of them smiled at each other and looked at Chu Han, who was incredibly immature and tender. They said with a smile, "Do you know what pirates do?" "I don't know, but I just need to know that you're not bad people," Chu Han said lightly. Interesting, Roger's pupils narrowed slightly and his eyes narrowed as he looked out at Chu Han, who was immature but appeared very mature. He smiled and said, "When a pirate is constantly facing disasters at sea, are you not afraid?" "Not afraid. When pirates are pursued by many navies, they face countless risks and may die at any moment. Aren't you afraid of that? Navy. Just cut it open. As for death, didn't I just experience this feeling?" Chu Han smiled faintly. "What is your dream then?" "Dream?" Chu Han hesitated for a moment, then a glimmer of brilliance flashed in his eyes. He looked at Roger with a smile on his face and said firmly, "My dream is to surpass everything and become the strongest. Beyond everything." What an interesting little guy. Roger smiled slightly and then turned to look at Raleigh beside him, realizing that he also showed an appreciative expression. He remembers the last time this old guy showed this kind of expression, as if he had met Shanks. Did he also think that this little guy in front of him had the same potential as Shanks? "May I join you now?" Chu Han looked at the two people who were staring at him silently, speechless. "Sorry, we cannot agree to your request," said the underworld king Raleigh, shaking his head and sighing. "Why?" Chu Han didn't get angry, but instead asked calmly, appearing very calm. This made him look a little higher in Roger and Raleigh's hearts. "Because of your age, you are still too young to protect yourself." Raleigh looked at Chu Han, who was young and short, with a hint of dimness in his eyes. He didn't want to agree to Chu Han's request and bring this good seedling into the pirate group. But now is not a good time. Since Roger became the Shanghai Thief King, their situation has become even more dangerous than before. They have been chased by the Navy 10 times in this month, which shows the attitude of the Navy government. They will never spare a living pirate king. As for Chu Han's age, Raleigh completely rejected Chu Han's excuses. After all, even though Chu Han is very young and cannot protect himself, they can still spend time educating him. When he grows up, he will definitely be a future fighter like Shanks. But now they really don't have time, and when the Navy tries their best to encircle and suppress them, the underworld King Lei Li has no confidence in ensuring that Chu Han will survive in the upcoming battle. Instead of letting this little guy die in the future, it's better to reject him now and let him live a peaceful life. Age. Chu Han lowered his head to look at his childish and tender body, then turned to Shanks and Bucky, who were busy in the distance, and said coldly, "They are not much older than me. Why can they, but I can't?" Raleigh was taken aback, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It's hard to say that he looks a few years older than you, but he can say dozens of hurtful things like that. How about this? As long as I win against Shanks on the following journey, you will officially let me join. How about that?" Chu Han pondered for a moment and said stubbornly. "This." Raleigh hesitated for a moment, about to refuse, but was suddenly stopped by a big hand. "Okay. I promise you." Roger took a step forward and looked at Chu Han with a stubborn expression, smiling. "Roger, this." Seeing this, Raleigh became anxious and was about to speak, but was interrupted by Roger's exit. "What's the reason to stop a man from going out to sea?" "You're right, buddy," Roger looked at Raleigh with a hearty smile. "Ah, forget it, you're the captain." "You're the captain." Raleigh sighed, gave a bitter smile, then turned to look at Chu Han and smiled, "Little guy, let's go, I'll take you to your room." "So you agreed to let me join?" Chu Han remained motionless and said with a faint smile. Raleigh was momentarily taken aback, then smiled and said, "It's just a reserve crew member. When you become a regular, it depends on when you beat that kid Shanks." Upon hearing this, Chu Han responded and followed closely, but Roger and Raleigh did not notice the faint smirk on the corner of his mouth as he turned around. At the same time, the cold mechanical voice echoed again in Chu Han's mind. "Ding! The branch mission has been successful, and the task rewards are being distributed. B.level Dragon Clan bloodline begins to transform, and Yanling is activating." Chapter 3. Nibelungen, Seeking Collection, Seeking Evaluation. You are listening at Naval Full.audio. Ding! Successful branch task. Task rewards ready for distribution. B.level Dragon Clan bloodline is beginning to infuse, and Yanling is activating. At the same time, the cold mechanical voice in Chu Han's mind rang out again, and then a sharp pain began to spread from within, causing Chu Han's eyebrows to furrow uncontrollably. Interrupt. With a cold snort in Chu Han's heart, the intense pain in his body began to disappear, and then the cold mechanical sound of the system echoed again in his mind. Ding! At the request of the host, the reward distribution has been stopped. Please collect the task reward in a timely manner. Upon hearing the familiar voice, Chu Han's face remained unchanged, but he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Although he didn't know what changes the injection of dragon blood would cause, it was clearly not a good time. At this moment, standing beside him were the underworld king Raleigh and the pirate king Gold. Although these two individuals could not be considered the top in the world, they were also among the top and strongest in the world. Their mentality and perception were not comparable to those of ordinary people. Once Chu Han experienced any anomalies in his acceptance of the Dragon Clan bloodline, he would be immediately noticed by these two individuals, causing unnecessary trouble. After all, when Raleigh discovered Chu Han, he was floating on the sea surface and using the excuse of having eaten demon fruits before was completely ineffective. That's why Chu Han stopped the system in the first place. Fortunately, at the last moment, it was successful, which also made Chu Han feel relieved. "Chu Han, what's wrong with you? Why is your face so pale?" At this moment, the underworld king Lei Li turned his head and saw Chu Han, whose face was slightly pale, wondering. Upon hearing this, Chu Han shook his head slightly and said with a bitter smile, "It's nothing, it just feels like his stomach is a bit hungry." Raleigh hesitated for a moment and didn't doubt Chu Han's words. He laughed and said, this is my negligence. I don't know how long you've been floating, and it's normal for you to be hungry. How about I take you to eat first and then to your room? Chu Han nodded lightly. Afterwards, Raleigh took Chu Han to the restaurant on the ship, while Roger returned to his captain's position and did not come with him. In the restaurant, Chu Han also met other members of Roger's pirates team under Raleigh's introduction. Although they were very surprised by Chu Han's joining, their attitude was very friendly. After a few conversations, they became familiar with each other. Subsequently, after a full meal, Chu Han was led by Raleigh to his room. The room was not big, but it was very simple and clean, and it was located at the end of the ship, appearing very remote and quiet, which made Chu Han very satisfied. After all, there are too many secrets about him, and living in seclusion is also beneficial for not letting people easily notice. You stay here for now, let me know if you need anything. Raleigh smiled at Chu Han as he walked into the room. Thank you Uncle Raleigh. Chu Han smiled faintly and bowed slightly to show his respect, saying. Raleigh waved his hand and smiled, you don't have to be so polite, after all, I am also your co-captain now, and it's only right to take care of you. And everyone on this ship has to work, even Roger is no exception, so you will follow Shanks to be responsible for the sailors' work in the future, you know. Raleigh blinked his eyes and joked. However, considering that you have just joined, I will give you a day off first and then work tomorrow. I know Uncle Raleigh, Chu Han smiled. Seeing this, Raleigh smiled and nodded, then gave Chu Han a few words before leaving the room, leaving Chu Han alone. Have you finally left? After Raleigh left, the smile on Chu Han's face slowly narrowed, but it was replaced by an endless coldness, as if this was the expression he truly deserved. In fact, it is indeed so. In the previous conversation on the deck, Chu Han was undoubtedly pretending. As a strong person in his past life, patience, disguise, and determination were all indispensable. Therefore, in order for Chu Han to join the Roger pirates smoothly, he must restrain his mind, pretend to be precocious and have a passionate dream, and demonstrate his qualifications. All the reason for doing this is that Chu Han knows that Roger and Raleigh are good people, but if they want to easily include a stranger in the pirate group, it is undoubtedly a fantasy. Moreover, Roger follows the route of the elite pirate group, and none of the members on the ship are simple. So, if Chu Han wants to join the Roger pirates, he must demonstrate his potential, make Roger and his team tempted, so that they can successfully complete the task. In fact, Chu Han has also succeeded, even comparing him to Shanks in the hearts of Roger and Raleigh. But Chu Han was unaware of this, as all his thoughts had already been focused on the system in his mind. He had a premonition that perhaps this system was his capital for rising in this pirate world. System. At the same time, after confirming that there was no one around, Chu Han lay on his bed, his eyes slightly narrowed, and he called out in his heart. Ding! Has the host confirmed receiving the task reward? The cold mechanical voice rang out again in Chu Han's mind, causing his pupils to shrink slightly. This system indeed possesses intelligence. Don't worry about this for now. I'll ask you, what exactly are you and what is your relationship with the crystal inside Nibelung root? Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly and he said coldly. Chapter 4. Speech of Spirit, Jun Yen, Seeking Collection 0. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the past life, due to the opening of the Nibelung root, strong people from all over the world went to it, and Chu Han, as the first killer, was no exception. In the end, people discovered a crystal stone in the Nibelung root, suspected to be a dragon crystal. As soon as this news was spread, those who had entered the Nibelung root instantly caused a sensation, and they all rushed to grab it. In the end, Chu Han was skilled enough to seize the crystal, but was surrounded by others and unfortunately fell. When Chu Han woke up, he found himself crossing into the world of the Pirate King, which made him doubt whether the Dragon Clan system at this time was related to that dragon crystal. Ding! Insufficient host permissions, unable to answer at the moment. Permission. Chu Han frowned slightly and said coldly, "What permission can I know?" Ding. Dragon King permission. Upon hearing this, Chu Han remained slightly silent. The Dragon King knew that his bloodline was beyond the S. level, and now that he has completed this task, he is only AAB. Level bloodline. At least there is still a long way to go from the Dragon King's bloodline. Okay, now I want to claim the task reward. After a long time, Chu Han temporarily let go of his doubts and said coldly. After all, no matter how big the secret is, strength is not as important. Chu Han, who has now traveled to become a child of the Pirate King, can be said to have no strength at all and is as weak as scum. Therefore, if Chu Han wants to survive in this world of pirates, he must first rely on the Dragon Clan bloodline in the system to enhance his strength. Only with absolute strength can one know more secrets. Ding. Mission rewards are being distributed, B.level Dragon Clan bloodline is being injected, and Yenling is being activated. Boom. After speaking, Chu Han suddenly felt a surge of blood pouring into his body out of thin air, burning like a fire, burning his body. Countless excruciating pains emanated from within, and the blood flowed wildly like a dragon, burning all the broken bones in Chu Han's body and evaporating most of the blood. This kind of pain is not something that humans can bear. Even though Chu Han has a strong willpower and is as hard as iron, he can't help but scream softly, his nails deeply ingrained in his palm. The body trembled and trembled, the internal organs were ignited, and the meridians were burned and curled. If anyone was present, they could definitely smell it. Chu Han's body emitted a roasted meat aroma. The blood burned out, and a flame of fire actually penetrated through the body. Clothes, hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, and all of these were burned out in the first place. At this moment, Chu Han transformed into a white bone, his flesh and blood had disappeared, and it was terrifying. Ding. The B.level dragon lineage injection is complete, and now we are starting to repair the host's body. After the cold mechanical sound, a heart condensed out of Chu Han's body, and the surrounding blood vessels crazily spread throughout his body. The bones are tinged with a light golden color, and they have grown even harder and stronger than before. Abnormal activity of hematopoietic cells containing dragon blood. Bang! 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 The heart beats, blood is transported into the blood vessels, and the Xiang cavity and organs all grow out for the first time. With the strong beating of the heart, granulation appeared from the heart, intertwined with flesh and blood, legs, arms, and muscles grew again. During this process, Chu Han's body felt numb, itchy, and unbearable, like 10,000 ants crawling on his body, unable to scratch. This feeling was probably tormenting people to the point of wanting to die. Soon, Chu Han appeared again, with all his flesh and blood growing out. At first, he was as red and moist as a baby's flesh and blood, but soon, he returned to his white, fair, firm, and hard appearance as before. Hair, eyelashes, eyebrows, and so on grew out of nowhere, and his body was pulled out of thin air. At this moment, Chu Han was even more handsome than before. Ding, B.level Dragon Clan bloodline activation, successful activation of Speak Spirit. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the word spirit. Jun Yen. At the moment when Chu Han opened his eyes, this paragraph suddenly rang out in his mind. Immediately, a large amount of flames burst out from Chu Han's body, and a chilling aura erupted from his body, as if a sleeping king was slowly awakening within Chu Han's body. The golden crow falls in the west, and the moon rabbit rises in the east. A day passed quickly, and night began to fall on the sea. At this moment, the closed door of Chu Han's room was suddenly opened, and a figure slowly walked out of it. Above the deck, Chu Han looked up and saw heavy rain pouring into his golden eyes in the gloomy night sky. That is a very strange feeling. He looked at the rainy sky and thought of the reflection of the entire sky in his pupils. The rain in the entire sky is scattered from a small point in the center of the sky, and it will fall into his eyes. What kind of feeling is like looking down at the world like a god, or using God's eyes to see the world? Chu Han clenched his fist, his eyes flashing with a glimmer of brilliance. The fresh feeling was always surprising, reborn, and blood flowed through his veins like a thawed river of cold ice. Each cell breathed recklessly and with all its might like a spring sprout. Endless power is silently transmitted along muscles and tendons. This is the first time Chu Han has experienced this feeling, and also the first time he has tasted the pleasure of a wine called forbidden and taboo. Chapter 5. Yaodao Village Reign, for collection. You are listening at Naval Full.audio. Speech and Spirit. Jun Yen Sequence. 89 The royal flame of the Bronze and Fire King lineage can ignite flammable substances within the realm and generate high heat within the realm. It can briefly compress the generated heat within the realm and then suddenly release it, producing an explosive effect. As far as Chu Han knows, there are a total of 118 types of Yanling, arranged in the form of a periodic table. Numbers 89 and above belong to high-risk Yanling, and number 89 is exactly Yanling Junyan. It can be said that Speaking Spirit is a special ability possessed by dragons and mixed-race species, and is an important combat technique that can even turn the entire battle situation around depending on the effect. The activation of the Dragon Clan bloodline not only greatly transformed Chu Han's body, making it stronger and more flexible, but more importantly, the language and spirit of the bloodline activation. Jun Yen also made Chu Han overjoyed. The power of the dragon spirit may not be understood by people in this world, but how could Chu Han, who has watched Dragon Clan before, not understand its terrifying aspects? It can be said that the power of the spirit is not inferior to the demonic fruits of this world, and even surpasses them. The higher sequence of the spirit can even destroy heaven and earth. The most important thing is that Speaking Spirit is different from devil fruit. The weak points of devil fruit are obvious and deadly. Not only are they afraid of seawater and sea tower stones, but they are even restrained by domineering aura. Speaking of spirit, they do not have these shortcomings, which is what satisfies Chu Han the most. Although the activation of the spirit of speech has temporarily increased my strength, it's not yet time for me to become complacent, otherwise I wouldn't know how to die. On the deck, Chu Han, dressed in black, looked up at the cold rain dripping from the sky with a slightly cold expression, muttering to himself. The water in this world is so deep that even the current Chu Han has no qualification to touch it. Whether it is a naval general, the 5 old stars, or a well-known pirate in the New World, they can easily kill Chu Han with a single move. Therefore, Chu Han will not naively think that he has activated Yanling and is the son of fate. He can wildly pull cool losers to explode the sky and walk sideways wherever he goes. If we do this, we will have to die a little earlier. It is not denied that Chu Han is indeed a genius now. His body, which has been transformed by the Dragon Clan bloodline, is definitely stronger than most people in this world. Whether it is learning swordsmanship or being domineering, it is easier than ordinary people, but what's the difference? A genius who died young can never be called a genius. So the most important thing Chu Han needs to do now is to hide his strength and protect himself well before he grows, and work hard to enhance his strength. This is the wisest thing. It's not time to be proud yet. The strength in front of you is the most important thing. Chu Han clenched his fist, feeling the constantly surging power in his body. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he thought to himself. When I grow up, it's when this world trembles and shakes for me. Thinking about it, Chu Han smiled at the corner of his mouth and looked at the gradually clear full moon in the sky. He stretched out his right hand, his fingers forming claws, and clenched it with force. Yes, one day Chu Han grasped power and strength, as if he had grasped the entire world in his hand. As if he were about to make a decision, he would overlook the mountains, breathe the air and the earth, and all those who rebelled would perish. The next day, the rainstorm stopped, the sun was shining, the wind was sunny and the sun was shining. On the deck, 3 thin figures are busy on it. Shanks, the clown Bucky and Chu Han, as trainee sailors, are working as sailors, cleaning the traces left by last night's rainstorm with dusters and mops. The underworld king Raleigh sat leisurely by the boat, happily fishing, occasionally turning his head to look at Chu Han's side, teasing and scolding, causing the lazy Shanks and Bucky to panic. Uncle Raleigh is good at everything, but he's a bit strict. He even has to supervise small things like wiping the deck, which makes it impossible for us to slack off a bit. Joker Bucky sighed at Shanks with a bitter expression as he wiped the railing. That's right, we're like the kind of people who slack off. We don't believe in our character at all, Shanks rarely retorted to Bucky, sighing mournfully before turning to look at Chu Han and saying, Chu Han, what do you think? Chu Han's face remained expressionless, meticulously dragging the deck as if wiping away some exquisite artwork. At this moment, he heard Shanks's words, raised his head, and stared at the two for a while, then said in a faint voice. Do you two have character? Chu Han, you're too sharp-tongued. You don't have character like Shanks, don't you? I don't have it either, do I, said the clown Bucky with a puff of anger. Just wait, Shanks reacted and immediately angrily said to the clown Bucky, Bucky, you don't have character. You didn't. Bucky retorted. You don't have it, your whole family doesn't have it. Shanks, I want to duel with you, Bucky angrily said, come on, I'm afraid of you, Shanks said without giving in. Looking at the two people in front of him glaring angrily at each other, who were about to start fighting, Chu Han remained speechless and left slowly, heading straight towards Raleigh's direction. He said, my work is done, you can do it yourself. Staying with idiots for a long time can also affect intelligence. Oh. It's Chu Han. Do you also want to come fishing with me, uncle? Raleigh looked at Chu Han slowly passing by, smiled, raised his fishing rod, and a big fish jumped out of the water and landed directly at Chu Han's feet. Chu Han picked up the lively big fish under his feet, looked at Raleigh with a serious expression, and said coldly, Uncle Raleigh, I want to ask you something. Raleigh threw the bait into the sea again, without looking back, and smiled, tell me, what's wrong with you trying to get rid of me, this old man? I want to learn swordsmanship from you. Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly and he said in a straight voice. Okay. Raleigh agreed without hesitation. Upon hearing this, Chu Han's pupils shrank slightly, somewhat surprised. Perhaps sensing Chu Han's confusion, Lei smiled and shook his head, saying with a smile. Do you feel very puzzled, why did I promise you so easily? A bit. Chu Han regained his composure and nodded. Perhaps you don't know yet, I also taught the swordsmanship of Shanks and Bucky on the ship, so teaching new people has always been my responsibility. Roger doesn't care about these things at all. If you don't mention this, I will ask you in a few days. But I didn't expect you to mention it so early, which surprised me a bit. Raleigh laughed, I have no choice, who said I am the weakest at the moment. Chu Han spread out his hand with a bitter smile and said, if I don't have some strength, how can I have the face to go out and say that I am a crew member of the Pirate King? Do you think so? Uncle Raleigh. That's right, Raleigh laughed heartily, then narrowed his eyes and stared at Chu Han with a deep and serious expression, since you have made up your mind, let's start training later. Let me tell you first that I am very strict. Don't cry if you can't hold on later. Uncle, men bleed without shedding tears. Chu Han stood with a serious and proud expression, and said coldly, if you don't believe me, let's start now. Don't worry. Raleigh waved his hand and smiled, how could practicing swordsmanship be without a sword? I have prepared a good sword specifically for you as a gift. A good sword. Chu Han hesitated slightly. Absolutely one of the best swords in the world, Raleigh blinked his eyes and said mysteriously, that sword is one of the 12 greatest swords. What is the name of that sword? Chu Han suppressed his shock and said calmly. The 12 Craftsmen of the Supreme Big Knife. Demon Knife Village Reign. P.S. There are too many words in this chapter, so let's treat it as 2 chapters. Also, let's kneel down and collect flowers, tickets, and finally add more tomorrow. I hope everyone can support us. Chapter 6. The Knife That Cannot Be Pulled Away. Seeking Collection. You are listening at Naval Full.audio. Black Pearl, in the cabin in the dark passage, there was an immense silence, and the dim lights were like ghostly eyes swaying in the wind, making it appear very eerie and terrifying. Step by step. At this moment, a crisp sound of footsteps suddenly came from the passage, shattering the tranquility here. In the dim light, 2 tall and short figures slowly appeared in the cabin. These 2 people are exactly Raleigh and Chu Han, who have just left the deck. Yaodao Village Reign. Interesting, I didn't expect this knife to actually exist. Chu Han looked at Lei Li's broad back in front of him, his eyes narrowed slightly, and a hint of brilliance flashed in his eyes. Yaodao Village Reign, also known as Yashandao. When this knife is pulled out to kill, the blade with a murderous aura will have dew. After killing someone, water will flow out from the blade to clean the bloodstains. This scene is like Village Reign cleaning leaves, hence it is called Village Reign. In the records of Chu Han's past life, Yaodao Village Reign is an evolved version of Yaodao Village Sheng, with a greater degree of evil than the former, but it is different in this world. As Raleigh just said, Yaodao Village Reign is one of the 12 craftsmen of the Supreme Big Knife, very precious, and of the same status as the legendary Yaodao Village Sheng. Perhaps the value of the Supreme Big Knife is on par, and its power depends more on the swordsman. This Demon Knife Village Reign, as Raleigh said, was the spoils of war that Roger and his team gained when they landed on the last island of the Great Voyage, Rafdru. However, because this knife was too sinister, even Roger and he didn't want to have too much contact, and others didn't use it much, that's why Chu Han was so cheap. Alright, it's here. At this moment, the sound of Raleigh chuckling sounded, and Chu Han, who was slightly distracted, suddenly woke up. He looked up and realized that he and Raleigh had walked to a room door at some point. Crunch, with a faint sound of friction, Lei Li and Chu Han pushed open the closed door and slowly walked in. Just as I walked in, what caught Chu Han's eye was a shimmering golden light, with countless gold treasures piled up throughout the room, seemingly worth at least billions of dollars. However, Chu Han was not surprised by these things because he knew that Roger and his companions had once been to an empty island, and what was not lacking on the island was gold. Chu Han also knew that these gold were probably not Roger's true treasure, at least not the big secret treasure he had mentioned before his death. If that so-called treasure was just these gold, it probably wouldn't have the ability to open up an era yet, and the true treasure may have been hidden by Roger in Rafdrup. Of course, this is just Chu Han's own speculation. The truth may not be known until Chu Han personally goes to Laftansk. Chu Han, give it. At this moment, Raleigh searched for a long time among the messy treasure piles, took out a similar Japanese long sword, and casually threw it to Chu Han. What is this? As soon as Chu Han started, he felt a heavy sensation, almost unable to catch it. He estimated slightly that the black long sword in front of him, which had an ancient scabbard, weighed 50 kilograms, which was unbelievable. This knife is the Demon Knife Village Reign that I just told you about. Raleigh casually found a place to sit down, took a bottle of wine, and laughed while drinking. Yaodao Village Reign. Upon hearing this, Chu Han's eyes flickered with a hint of heat. He looked at the long sword lying quietly in his hand, which looked very ordinary, and wanted to pull it out. Click. With a crisp sound, the tightly closed scabbard remained motionless. On the contrary, Chu Han's small hand almost dislocated due to excessive force. Ha ha ha. Seeing this, Raleigh burst out laughing and a strange smile appeared on his face. He looked at Chu Han and felt a little uneasy, saying coldly, "What's going on? Why can't this knife be pulled out?" Looking at Chu Han, who was slightly angry, Raleigh shook his head and smiled, sighing, because this knife is called the Demon Knife Village Rain. When we got it, Roger and I even tried it with everyone on the ship, but no one was able to pull it out. Perhaps this is its monster, or maybe it hasn't found the owner it wants yet. And, if this sword can be easily pulled open, do you think it's your turn? Don't forget that even if I can't use it, Shanks is still a swordsman. You don't know the importance and charm of a good sword for a swordsman, do you? So, Uncle Raleigh, did you just say you wanted to give it to me? Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly and he said coldly. Raleigh shook his head and said with a smile, of course it's true. I'll give you this sword as a gift for you to board the ship. But this sword can't be pulled out, what's the use of it? It's like a long stick, Chu Han said with a slightly angry expression. This Demon Blade Village Rain was originally given to you for practicing swordsmanship, Raleigh blinked and joked, besides, although this Demon Blade Village Rain cannot be pulled out, it is very strong and hard. It is enough for both practicing swordsmanship and hitting people. You should experience it yourself. Speaking, Raleigh laughed heartily, patted Chu Han's shoulder, turned around and walked out of the room, leaving only Chu Han with a speechless face. Looking at the figure of Lei Li walking away, Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly, and then lowered his head to look at the pitch-black Demon Blade Village Rain in his hand, with a hint of eerie light flashing in his eyes. Can't pull it out. Chu Han smiled at the corner of his mouth and murmured, then a golden light flashed through his eyes. The dragon blood in his body boiled instantly, and a domineering aura emanating from his body, exerting a slight force. Resounding. A cold light suddenly flashed in the room, and the once tightly closed Yaodao village rain was unexpectedly pulled open by Chu Han. Cold and sharp, the demon sword is born. Chapter 7. Shanks, let's have a fight. Seeking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sunrise rises, and there are no clouds for thousands of miles. 1001. 1002. 1003. On the deck of the Black Pearl, a young figure was wielding an unsheathed, antique long sword, constantly chopping and chopping. He was also wearing a heavy suit of armor, weighing at least 100 pounds. Sweating profusely, the whole person seemed to have been lifted out of the water, but at this moment, this figure seemed to be unnoticed. It just numbly repeated the movements in its hand, and under the cold gaze, the immature and tender face showed a resolute expression that did not match its age. 3000. Hoo. An hour later, Chu Han gasped for breath and threw away the heavy demon blade village rain in his hand. He lay powerless on the deck, sweating profusely as he looked at the white clouds in the sky, with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. This body in this world is still too weak, even with the reinforcement of dragon blood, difficult training like this can only be barely endured, Chu Han sighed inwardly. After asking Raleigh to teach him swordsmanship, it had been 3 months. During these 3 months, Chu Han went from easy to difficult, constantly receiving Raleigh's hellish training. Fortunately, Chu Han's mixed-race physique and his strong willpower, otherwise he would have been disabled by Raleigh for a long time. 50 kilograms of demonic sword village rain, and 100 kilograms of heavy armor, the weight on Chu Han's body surprisingly reached a terrifying 300 pounds. In addition, with 10 hours of high-difficulty training every day, this is not something that an ordinary 8-year-old child can bear. Perhaps only Chu Han, a monster, can bear it. However, these 3 months have not been without gains, at least this body has slowly grown up, not as weak and unbearable as it was at the beginning. Chu Han stood up slowly, let out a light breath, clenched his fist, and experienced the constantly surging power in his body, with a glimmer of brilliance in his eyes. And most importantly, what I have learned from the others in Roger's Pirates during these 3 months is the biggest gain. From the beginning, Chu Han did not expect to climb to the top of this world solely based on his dragon bloodline and spiritual power, so he went to search for Lei Li and sought advice on swordsmanship. Devil fruit, domineering, swordsmanship. These 3 things are the mainstream in the world of the One Piece King. Since there must be a reason for their existence, they may not be much weaker than the spirit of speech. However, the shortcomings of the devil fruit are too obvious and fatal, and the devil fruit is not something that can be seen as one wishes. Therefore, Chu Han is not very interested in this. Of course, if the good devil fruit is placed in front of Chu Han, he will not mind having an additional ability. As for domineering energy, according to Lei Li, Chu Han is too young at this time to develop it, otherwise it will cause incurable hidden injuries and have a great impact on his future growth. That's why Chu Han set his sights on swordsmanship. A grown swordsman's terrifying power is no less than that of a strong individual with top-notch demonic fruits. The most notable example is the swordsman's eagle eye, which, with his swordsmanship and physical abilities alone, can draw with Shanks and dominate the position of the top strong individual, demonstrating the terrifying aspect of swordsmanship. In addition to learning swordsmanship, Chu Han also constantly learned from the members of Roger's pirates team his skills, such as navigation, medicine, and cooking. As long as there were useful skills for survival at sea, Chu Han would patiently learn and seek advice. At this moment, Chu Han was like a dry sponge constantly absorbing nutrients from Roger's pirate group, squeezing and drying its important value, enriching himself. And this knowledge will be the capital for Chu Han to survive in this world in the future. Chu Han, why don't you take a break? You've been practicing all morning, and if you keep practicing, your body may not be able to handle it. Don't forget that you're only 8 years old. Just as Chu Han was about to pick up the village rein on the ground and continue his training, a burst of laughter suddenly came to his ears. He turned his head and saw Raleigh and Shanks slowly walking towards him holding a pile of food in the distance. Uncle Raleigh, Shanks. Chu Han picked up the village rein and greeted Raleigh and Shanks with a faint smile. You're really serious? Shanks nonchalantly circled around Chu Han, looking at him with a curious gaze and laughing. I didn't expect you, who looked like a noble young master, to be a cultivation maniac. It's unbelievable. Upon hearing this, Chu Han rolled his eyes silently, ignoring the second cargo. Chu Han, you've been training for 3 months now, haven't you? Lei Li threw a bottle of beer to Chu Han, looked at it slightly, and smiled. It's 3 months and 3 days. Chu Han took a sip of wine and said lightly. You've changed a lot compared to 3 months ago, your muscles are coming out. Raleigh smiled, then narrowed his eyes slightly and his tone became stern. But you also know that simply training alone cannot produce a strong person. Every strong person is honed through blood and fire, so what you need most now is not contact but practical experience, and to fully utilize what you have learned in the past 3 months. I know this, but who are you going to fight with? Is it Uncle Yu? Chu Han looked at Lei Li in confusion and said. Raleigh shook his head and gave a faint smile, saying, of course not me, and you didn't say you wanted to challenge Shanks 3 months ago, did you? You are now qualified. Upon hearing this, Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly, with a burst of brilliance in his eyes. He turned his head to look at Shanks, who was in a daze, and a faint smirk curved from the corner of his mouth. He coldly said. Come on, Shanks, let's have a fight. Chapter 8. Chu Han vs. Xiang Ke, Seeking Collection. You are listening at Naval Full.audio. Come on, Shanks, let's have a fight. Ah. Upon hearing this, Shanks was startled and looked at Chu Han and Lei Li with a bewildered expression, confused and puzzled. Uncle Lei Li, Chu Han, what are you talking about? How can I not understand? Please sword. Chu Han didn't say much, but just 2 crisp words, coldly flicking out the unsheathed demon knife village rein, slowly pointing towards Shanks. In Chu Han's past life, inviting a sword was meant to be a direct admonition, but among the swordsmen in this world, it was a kind of invitation to fight. Regardless of whether the invitation was successful or not, the opponent would attack. Chu Han, can we not fight? Shanks spread his hand and said with a mournful expression. Wasn't it agreed to have a good drink? What kind of ghost suddenly invited the sword? When did our friendship boat capsize? At this moment, Shanks's heart was speechless. Sword out. Chu Ling responded in a cold voice, and a faint and chilling aura began to emanate from his body, indicating a sense of war. Regarding what Lei Li said, Chu Han also agrees that simply practicing alone is absolutely impossible to become stronger. Every strong person is born through the trials of blood and fire. Therefore, what Chu Han lacks most now is not practice, but practical combat. And Shanks is a very good opponent. As the future 4 emperors, Shanks will never be weak even in his youth. He happens to be Chu Han's current opponent, and defeating Shanks will also help improve Roger and Raleigh's status, which is beneficial and harmless for some future plans. It can be said that Shanks is simply the best sharpening stone. Okay. Looking at Chu Han's resolute and indifferent expression, Shanks seemed to feel Chu Han's wariness, sighed slightly, and then responded with a serious expression. Keep going. Raleigh threw a wooden knife at Shanks and smiled. Shanks, just play with Chu Han and remember to pay attention to the weight when you start. In Raleigh's heart, although Chu Han's qualifications were good, both his age and cultivation time were too short, far inferior to the current Xiangs. Therefore, although Raleigh suggested a martial arts competition between the two, he did not believe that Chu Han could defeat Xiangs. After all, the age difference between the two was there. Don't worry, Uncle Raleigh, Shanks took the wooden knife and gave a hearty smile. At the moment he grabbed the knife, his playful smile faded away and was replaced by an extremely serious expression. He looked at Chu Han with a slightly narrowed gaze and said in a positive voice. Although Uncle Raleigh said so, I won't let you down. I will do my best to fight you as a gesture of respect. Do you still plan to fight me, Chu Han? Battle. Faced with the contempt of Raleigh and Shanks, Chu Han's face remained calm, his eyes narrowed slightly, his long sword raised in his hand, and he coldly uttered the word. Okay. Shanks exclaimed excitedly, and immediately his body tensed up, full of fighting spirit. At the next moment, Chu Han's eyes shrank and his long knife stabbed towards Shanks. The speed is too fast. It doesn't seem like the speed and strength that an 8-year-old child should have. At the point of the wooden knife, there was a flickering cold light, as if it could be transformed into sword energy at any moment. The knife came too fast, and Shanks quickly dodged away, and the wooden knife in his hand pushed away the power of Chu Han's sword. Ding! With a brief touch, the two quickly parted ways, and Chu Han's eyes narrowed. With such a fast reaction speed and strong strength, he truly deserved to be the future 4 emperors of Xiangs. Come again. Shanks laughed, as his fighting blood seemed to be stimulated by Chu Han, and he was thrilled. After speaking, Shanks rushed forward. Chu Han's eyes narrowed slightly, but he was also calm and fearless. The village rein in his hand rushed towards Shanks as he attacked. Knife-cutting patterns, sword-piercing weaknesses. Although Chu Han has not been practicing swordsmanship for a long time, he also understands this truth. After practicing this swordsmanship for the past 3 months, it has become Chu Han's instinct. At a rapid pace, the village rein in Chu Han's hand instinctively cleaves towards the weakest point of the Xiang's wooden knife. If it had been in the past, it would have been miraculous, but Shanks seemed to have noticed Chu Han's intention, with a hint of excitement. With a slight flip of the wooden knife in his hand, he avoided Chu Han's blow and turned towards Chu Han's side. Ding! The two swords once again touched each other, and Chu Han returned without success. He charged forward again, even though he was reborn as a young man. The fierce surname brought by his past life was fully reflected in this moment. He fought, and fought without leaving behind, with full force and passion. He was quick to strike, precise to pass, and ruthless to pass. The knife was in place, the knife was deadly, approaching Shanks with speed. Chu Han controlled every blade so precisely. Shanks also had a good life. Under Chu Han's sharp and fierce sword, he was able to handle it with ease, and at the same time, his eyes were even more excited, as if this was the opponent he wanted. The rapid attack did not yield any results, and Chu Han did not become impatient. Instead, he fought steadily while facing Shanks, as if he could hone his swordsmanship. Slowly, Chu Han seemed to enjoy this kind of battle. Only with such a joyful and thrilling battle can the swordsmanship taught by Lei Li rapidly increase, integrate and transform into his own swordsmanship. Kill, kill, kill. There is no need to reserve anything, no need to worry about hurting the other party. As long as we make the greatest effort and unleash our potential, we can continuously develop our own potential, break through existing constraints, and continuously improve. PS == the update is late again. Junyang apologizes for coming home very late these days. Chapter 9. Naval Attack, for collection. You are listening at Naval Full.audio. Just as Chu Han and Xiang Ke were engaged in a fierce battle outside the battlefield, a tall and domineering figure quietly approached Raleigh's side, frowning as he watched the two people engaged in fierce battles on the battlefield. "Roger, why are you here?" Raleigh turned to look at the person next to him and asked unexpectedly. Roger vigorously patted Raleigh's shoulder and laughed. "If I don't come, how would I have the chance to see such a wonderful battle? Raleigh, you're not interesting enough. You don't even call me for such a spectacle. Also, why did Chu Han and Xiang Ke suddenly start a fight? They have a good relationship." "It was Chu Han who proposed a duel with Shanks," Raleigh said with a wicked smile at the corner of his mouth. "Of course, my instigation was also necessary. Ha ha ha, I knew it all had to do with this matter. You, the master at Shanks and Chu Han's stall, are also unlucky enough," Roger said with a smile, smashing his mouth. "Isn't this considered to be cannibalism among fellow disciples?" "Of course not," Raleigh glanced at Roger and said speechlessly, "it's just a sparring, and it's beneficial for both Chu Han and Xiangs. Only in battle can one quickly improve their strength. You don't know this truth." "That's not a bad thing," Roger squinted his eyes as he looked at Chu Han and Shanks, who were fighting hard on the battlefield. He frowned slightly and said, "Who do you think will win this battle?" "It's probably Shanks, after all, Chu Han's cultivation and age are too young." Although he was on par with Shanks for a while, his physical strength was a disadvantage. Once his physical strength was exhausted, Chu Han would definitely not be a match for Shanks, Lei Li frowned and analyzed. "That's not necessarily true," Roger said with a smug smile at the corner of his mouth. "I guess Chu Han might win in the end. You see, although that kid's attack is fierce, his footsteps and breathing are not chaotic at all. There's no hint of exhaustion." Lei Li's pupils narrowed slightly, looking at Chu Han, whose face had always been calm on the battlefield. He let out a light sigh and then cursed, "That's really true. Is that damn kid really an 8-year-old kid? Even a normal adult wouldn't be able to handle this intense battle, but that kid still looks like nothing happened. Was he a monster? Ha ha ha, I didn't expect that you, Raleigh, would also slip your eyes one day." Roger laughed heartily, but suddenly coughed up. When the hand covering his mouth was released, a faint trace of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Roger, you." Raleigh's face turned heavy as he hesitated to speak. Roger waved his hand and looked at Chu Han and Shanks on the battlefield, with a bitter smile on his lips. He inexplicably said, "Old buddy, I suddenly want to cure my illness." Raleigh paused and said, "Is it because of Chu Han and Shanks?" Roger nodded and said with a hearty smile, "I suddenly feel like it's good to be alive. I really want to see where these two kids will go in the future, maybe they may surpass me. But I may not be able to see it, but I will use the rest of my life to open up an era for these two kids to gallop on." Roger laughed arrogantly, like a master who has come to the end of his life, although old, still exudes a domineering and majestic aura that cannot be underestimated. "Opening up the era." Raleigh chuckled bitterly and said, "Your ambition is still as great as ever, but I will support you because you are my captain and partner. This was decided from the moment you invited me to board the ship. At the same time, on the battlefield. Dang, dang, dang. This time, Shanks made a strong attack. Shanks had a wooden knife in his hand that was incredibly fast. After a diligent battle just now, it was even faster than before. Even with Chu Han's eyesight, there was a feeling of being unable to grasp it. Chu Han's eyebrows furrowed slightly as he felt the fierce wind and rain brought by the Shanks' wooden knife. Several times, it was both dangerous and dangerous, but he still didn't use the domineering Shanks. If he used domineering Shanks, how strong would he be? No wonder he could compete with the world's largest swordsman, Eagle Eye, in swordsmanship in the future. Shanks' swordsmanship is too strong. Chu Han, I have to take it seriously. Are you okay? Shanks waved his wooden knife and laughed broadly. Serious. Then I'll start taking it seriously too. Chu Han dodged flexibly, his eyes narrowed slightly, and said lightly. Boom. The two swords collided again, emitting a roar. Chu Han and Xiang Ke took the opportunity to retreat with force and landed gracefully, looking at each other with fierce fighting intent, like dragons and tigers in battle. Are you saying that you haven't done your best either? Shanks exclaimed unexpectedly. At this moment, Chu Han had already taken off his heavy armor, breathed a light sigh, looked at Shanks coldly, and smiled. Are you different too? Okay. Then let's do our best to fight. Shanks chuckled heartily, then took a step and rushed towards Chu Han, his momentum suddenly changing, as if he had changed someone else. Kill. Chu Ling snorted, and the dragon blood in his body instantly boiled. After taking off the load, his speed suddenly increased, and the village rein in his hand also bravely welcomed him. Boom boom. In an instant, both of them widened their eyes, their strength skyrocketing, as if their sword-swinging speed had suddenly increased by half. A sword is swift, a sword is heavier than a sword. The battle entered a white-hot stage, and the two of them fought fiercely like crazy demons, evenly matched and fiercely fierce. Boom boom. At this moment, a sudden roar echoed from the sea, and huge splashes of water splashed beside the Black Pearl. Giant warships slowly appeared in front of the Black Pearl PS. For collection, for flowers, for evaluation tickets, for 3 requests. Chapter 10. Munch-d, Capu, Seeking Collection. You are listening at Naval Full.audio. Boom boom. Giant waves splashed on the side of the ship, causing the Black Pearl to shake and potentially capsize at any time. What's going on? Enemy attack. Shanks exclaimed in surprise. At this moment, Chu Han also stopped fighting, frowning slightly as he looked at the huge ships constantly rising from the sea ahead, with a hint of doubt flashing in his eyes. Navy. Or pirates again. The ship. Captain. At this moment, Bucky ran out of the back of the ship in a panic and shouted nervously, "Yes. It's the Navy." Upon hearing this, Roger stepped up to the bow of the ship and looked at the huge ships in the distance that were constantly floating from the bottom of the sea, wrapped in huge bubbles. His brow furrowed slightly and he turned to Raleigh, unsure, and asked. "Raleigh, when we arrived here just now, we should have explored it, right? How could so many coated ships suddenly appear on the seabed?" Raleigh nodded. "Most likely, while our attention was shifting to Chu Han and his 2 young men fighting, they secretly used bubbles to sneak over from the bottom of the sea. But what kind of power would all these ships be? It must be that bastard Cap, and it seems that the world government is not willing to let go of me, the Pirate King. As long as I live for one day, the top 5 guys probably won't be able to sleep." Roger laughed heartily, without any fear of the impending crisis. Looking at Roger's proud expression, Raleigh smiled slightly and did not refute him. He was just a little worried that the Navy would only send Cap to take such a big offensive. Navy. Chu Han frowned slightly as he looked at the approaching ship, with a large sail hanging from it and a pattern resembling a seagull drawn on it. This was the flag of justice of the naval government. Roger. At this moment, a loud roar came from the air, a huge iron ball connected to a naval ship, cutting through the air and falling in a parabolic shape from the air. Listening to this sound, everyone on the pirate ship instinctively lifted their heads and looked into the air where the sound was coming from. Everyone was stunned. I saw a middle-aged man with one hand grasping the iron chain connecting the huge iron ball, and the other hand grabbing the railing of the warship, flying towards here. The most surprising thing was that there was no tearing pain caused by the tremendous pulling force in between on this person's face. Instead, he stared angrily at this place. What a crazy guy. Raleigh came to his senses and said as he supported his eyes. Ah, this Cap is still the same as before. When we meet, we either throw a ball or a shell. Roger sighed in distress as he touched his forehead. Pang. With two loud noises, a huge iron ball and a warship hit the sea at the same time, and then huge waves appeared from around the iron ball and the warship, surging in all directions. The waves that covered the sky and sun were like a tsunami, crashing down with a loud bang, causing the Black Pearl to shake wildly, like a flat boat among wolves, at any time at risk of being swallowed up. Everyone hurry up, don't let go. Raleigh shouted, and the other members of Roger pirates who ran out grabbed the railing in panic to avoid being swept into the sea. Such a large wave, once caught, would definitely tear ordinary people to pieces. After grabbing onto the railing, Chu Han instinctively looked at the warship descending from the sky on the opposite side, with a hint of disbelief in his eyes. Jew. Surprisingly, it's okay. Are their ships all made of steel? Because the warship is bottom down and the walls are covered with a layer of iron, this impact only slightly changed shape, and the warship sank smoothly without sinking, and the huge iron ball sank directly into the seabed due to its huge density difference with seawater, and because it entered from the coast here, it only sank for 30.40 meters before collapsing. In addition, the iron chain was long enough, and the warship did not sink as a result. As the warship stabilized and rebounded for a while, the middle-aged man who was accustomed to falling into the sea due to the downward landing force almost moved. I saw him holding onto the left hand of the ship's railing, and with a slight effort, he jumped from the wall of the ship to the deck. I came up with an impulse to kill him. Why are you all asleep? This is not acceptable. When we return to our headquarters, I will definitely train you well. Don't compare us to monsters like you. It's so uncomfortable. I almost thought I was going to die. The Navy on this warship are all a group of top elites gathered by the headquarters of the Navy, with very strong bodies. However, they were all hit on the deck by the descending strange force shock, and were not so injured. However, this also frightened them quite a bit. Although they were not injured, due to the shock, each of them felt as if their internal organs had moved. All right, soldiers, quickly bring me 10,000 shells. With one hand pulling on the white cloak hanging from his shoulder, the middle-aged man tilted his head left and right, squeezing his clenched fist with the palm of his hand, making a gurgling sound as he walked towards the front of the warship. As soon as his words fell, for an instant, the Navy lying on the deck stood up, saluted, and then responded. Yes. Just as the man walked up to the front of the warship, there were rows of iron frames with shells on them, and a whole of 200 were already ready. Roger, I didn't say that I had to fight to the death with you. How many more times do you have to escape? The middle-aged man looked angrily at Roger on the pirate ship across from him. Capu, I also said that I have unfinished things to do on my own, and I cannot fight to the death with you. Roger said, unwilling to be outdone, facing the angry face of the middle-aged man. P.S. Collection. Review. Flowers. Just smash whatever you have. Junyang is poor ___.